Among rusted iron and caustic stench, a beaten man awaits his sentence to hell. Come this coming morning, or maybe the next, he will be hung or lashed, or maybe fed to a lion. But his death is assured, and his torment evermore so. In with depths of self-sorrow, his head was brought up to meet the eyes of a representative of Olmir's sea. Child, I wish not to curse you or toss you aside. There is still a way to paradise for you, if you're true enough to endure it. They stuck his form in a ton of iron coated in 1,000,000 spikes to rend both flesh and sin from his body. The soul was cleansed and his life was given purpose for the 3 days of life he enjoyed before the bleeding led him ecstasy and bliss into heaven. His sentence averted and his penance paid in full, the knight's corpse lay upon the ground, a holy martyr of Olmir's will. The Penance armor is a unique set of armor in Fear and Hunger, which allows its wearer to be largely protected, with the honestly negatable side effect of constantly bleeding. Now this armor also has some story to it. It's got some interesting lore to it, and it even spans outside of Fear and Hunger's time period into well, it's before 2, but like after 1, so in between 1 and 2. And a unique character to go along with this. Some old-fashioned cut content. My favorite. The first thing we know, interestingly, is this weird pint-sized torturer named Trotter. He claims to have had a hand in its invention. Now, if he's telling the truth or not, he might be, he might not be. Torture's his thing, so he might have... Fear and Hunger has this concept where, unless there's conflicting information, that's sort of what happened officially. Now, we also get some more lore about it in a specific book talking about the Penance armor. And it gives a sum up of what what we know. The Penance armor comes from Vatican City, made for mostly death row inmates and people with life sentences. And that it is very painful. You will... Now, if this wasn't an RPG and we all had protagonist power, we would all be dead. Or you die from bleeding out in like probably less than a week. I'm giving like a few days. Now, it's meant to cleanse the mind of, sin, whatnot. It's like medieval medicine. It's not gonna do that. It's just gonna kill them in like a long, painful way. Now, they were also sent out on suicide missions. I'll get back to why that is interesting later. Now, also, we skip ahead a couple hundred years to the 17th century. Now, in a rising threat of witches and vampires, which may or may not have been real. Like, I know it's the funger universe where creatures are plenty. And, like, the only one out of those two things I would actually believe are witches. But even then, you can get some, like, false positives. It's like... Yeah, it's plausible for both of these to exist, though the amount that exist and how many people actually are, that's something they could probably have fudged the numbers on, air quotes included. This was used in the 1700s, so that sort of era in history. Vatican City made it. A very otherworldly sword, the Sabbath. It also, the sword itself, contains an image of Olmer, the Ascended One. Now, this is like a common thing. Olmer is basically like the Jesus of this universe, so it's like if you put Jesus on a sword. That's not the important part. The more important part is that it does well, actually, there's two sort of things of major note with this. One, the sword was used by Penance Knights, so they were still around by the 1700s. As a, like, new... This is like the sword that a Penance Knight would have from 1700s to beyond, if they even continued beyond that. Now, another thing of note, I should bring this up if I'm talking about Sabbath. Kahara does have a similar sword, though it only says that it was adopted. Yeah, or like, you know, it was used. It didn't say it was, you know, made specifically for the Penance Knights. So, reasonably, Kahara could have just bought the sword, or like the Vatican would have adopted this sword later on after seeing like, oh yeah, let's use this sword, it's got some nice properties, let's make more of these. Kahara's basically rich, he could afford his own like unique sword. So it makes sense for theoretically both of them to have them without it being a mutually exclusive thing of like, oh, they based this sword off Kahara's sword or something like that. It's more simpler than you'd think. It does do otherworldly damage, so it is actually mystic. It does deal with otherworldly forces, so it actually does do what it says. It's not some made up, you know, hoax by the Vatican to be like, we shall kill all witches and vampires, thou shalt not thee. Okay, so what can be inferred? That's the second topic of this. Now this one, it's a little interesting, but I feel like I should delve into the sort of idea of what they are doing now. Is there still Penance Knights? Now that's an interesting question that relates to a lot of things, like how the Vatican works with its priests. So that one is interesting, but I think largely they've been discontinued. I don't know when, but I got a feeling there might have been now, as of the 1900s, oh, yeah, 1900s, have been sort of discontinued. Or at least not used as much, or just like, you know, something you'd find in a museum. It'd be like, the ancient penance armor was used upon the Vatican City's knights. Something like that. But I don't think they're in use now. Now, when they were discontinued exactly, unsure. The latest date we hear from them is the 1700s, so somewhere between that and 1942. So I'm probably thinking maybe either very on the tail end of the 1700s or in the middle of the 1800s. Somewhere around then, they probably discontinued it and maybe brought back, you know, bring in some of their more, like, inhuman beliefs and usage. Though I say bring in, I just mean they probably just did a better job at hiding them. There's some sketchy fuckers. Oh yeah, this is sort of simple things to infer, nothing major about the Penance Knights that we know of. But I think, yeah, these are sort of like the guys you send in. So I assume, hell, even if there's a prequel game, we could probably see them, you know, roam around doing a suicide mission or something. But anyways, another key thing. The Penance armor must not have been around, or at least not have been... It was invented recently around one's time. Or at least somewhere in Trota's lifetime. Now, he's not immortal. He's like, what? He's like 30-something in, like, medieval times, so... Theoretically, the armor could have been made, like, 10, 12... 6 years ago. Like, it probably wasn't even a recent invention. Like, that book on them could have been written like a year ago from one. Now, I don't know this for sure, but this is why we're on the speculation part. This is sort of where I'm a little, like, off the cuff in what I think about this armor. But it is still interesting. A very, very interesting idea. Now, here's something else interesting to close off this smallish video on. It involves a certain cut character or two. So here's the interesting part. Now, a while ago, someone managed to dig up this image of two portrait-styled drawings by Miro. Or maybe Miro posts them. I need to double check that immediately. Well, immediately-ish. Still interesting. Miro, before, somewhere during development or like after the first release, somewhere around then, Miro had made two other playable characters in that portrait art style. A virgin maid, which is interesting and I would have liked to have seen more, but that doesn't relate to this video. We also got the Penance armor drawn in there. Now here's the interesting part. The Penance Knight was originally going to be a player character. A sort of, the way he described it, as a sort of grunt type. So that was the Penance Knight, and he would be an RE grunt. Personally, I'm not familiar with Resident Evil, so I don't know what that exactly means, but I do know there's a character called Grunt, so I'm assuming it's just that guy, but in medieval era armor. Anyways, the reason he scrapped this character was because he liked the symmetry between like the 4 main characters and the 4 new gods, which is fair. That matches, it has nice overlap. I personally would have still been interested in seeing what these two have played like as some sort of new game plus characters, but I'm not gonna dig it. Like, the main 4 characters for in Hunger are very like recognizable, but it's not about them. This is about the Penance Knight, the Penance Knight, the Knight of the Wind. Anyways, so there is also, interesting enough, certain sprites that were found of this, a naked dude. It was this random dude, no particularly interesting features. And the file had something interesting about it. It alluded to the fact that this was the Penance Knight out of his armor. Now this was, the specific sprite wasn't them, it was a husk of them, but it still showed, you know, fundamentally them. Which is interesting that Miro had played with the idea long enough to do a sprite of like them without the armor. I mean, it's an uninteresting sprite. I mean, these Penance Knights are meant to be Italian. Give that man a frickin' moustache of power. The implications with this Penance Knight armor can range from anything. He's sort of the self-insert, as far as I can tell. He could be whatever. I assume his story would have been something along the lines of, "You did a criminal thing. What was it? Pick skill." Maybe one of them would have been, "You actually didn't commit the crime," but still. "You get choice. Pick one. Get cool skill. Or get useless skills." Looking at you, Ragnarvalda. It's still interesting all in all that the Penance armor was originally going to be a character on its own, which would have been possibly fun to play, you know, starting with the Penance armor. Definitely would have been interesting to see that play out. This is the end of my discussion / lore compiling of the Penance armor and the Penance Knight. This has been a fun small thing to do, though I will easily admit this is probably leaning towards a rambling discussion video than a proper lore video. but still fun either way. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I may do more, I may do less, I may never do this again. I may clone myself so I can force that clone to do this instead of me. We'll only see with time. And if I invent that cloning machine. Nah. The point is, this has been fun, this serious thing. This is just an ending addendum tacked on to the end of this video.